There's a moment. Most men never notice. No argument, no confrontation, no obvious failure. Just a subtle shift. And from that moment on, things are different. People listen less. They interrupt more. They stop taking you seriously, not suddenly, but gradually. And the worst part is, you don't even realize when it started. Because losing power doesn't happen in loud, dramatic ways. It happens quietly, in small behaviors, small decisions, small reactions that seem insignificant in the moment. A man speaks, and then immediately explains himself. He makes a point, and then softens it. He feels tension, and rushes to remove it. Nothing extreme, but enough. Because every time you do that, you send a signal, not through words, but through behavior. A signal that says, I'm not fully certain. I need this to be accepted. I'm adjusting to you. And once that signal is felt, the dynamic shifts. Now people don't follow your lead. They test it. They question it. They feel they can move you. That's the moment. Not when you failed, but when you became adjustable. Most men think power comes from what you do, what you achieve, what you show. But real power is something else. It's stability. The ability to stay the same, regardless of what's happening around you. And the moment that stability breaks, even slightly, your position changes, because people don't respond to what you say. They respond to how solid you are. If your tone shifts under pressure, they feel it. If your posture changes, they notice. If your reactions speed up, they read it. And they adjust accordingly. Not consciously, but instinctively. That's why two men can say the same thing and get completely different responses. One sounds certain, the other sounds like he's trying. And trying is where power starts to disappear, because the moment you try to control how you're perceived, you lose control of yourself. And when you lose control of yourself, you lose control of the interaction. That's where it begins, not in failure, not in weakness, but in a subtle shift from being grounded to being reactive. The moment you started losing power wasn't when someone challenged you. It was when you stopped holding your ground. And most men don't even recognize when that happens, because it doesn't look like weakness. It looks like being smart, being calm, not making things a big deal. But underneath, it's something else. A man gets interrupted and lets it slide. Someone dismisses his point, and he doesn't address it. Someone tests him, and he chooses to ignore it. Not once, but repeatedly. And each time, the line moves, just a little. At first, it feels harmless. You think, it's not worth reacting. It's not that serious. I'll just let it go. But what you don't see is this. Every time you don't respond to something that matters, you teach people how to treat you, silently, without saying a word. Because people are always watching for one thing, where your boundaries are. And if those boundaries are unclear, they don't assume strength. They assume flexibility. And flexibility becomes permission. Permission to interrupt you more. Permission to challenge you more. Permission to take your words less seriously. Not because people are against you, but because you showed them there's no resistance. That's the shift. Power is not about reacting to everything, but it's also not about ignoring everything. It's about knowing what matters and not letting it slide. Most men go to extremes. They either overreact or they say nothing at all. Both lose power. One makes you unstable, the other makes you invisible. But the man who holds his position does something different. He doesn't react emotionally. He doesn't escalate unnecessarily. But he also doesn't ignore what crosses the line. He addresses it calmly, directly, without excess. And that creates something most men never build: clarity. Now people know where he stands. Now people understand what is acceptable and what isn't. Now people adjust. Because when boundaries are clear, behavior becomes precise. But when boundaries are missing, everything becomes loose, casual, careless, disrespectful. And that's where power fades. Not in one moment, but in many small ones. Moments where you chose comfort instead of position. Moments where you avoided friction instead of holding the line. And over time, those moments add up until one day you realize something changed. People don't treat you the same. They don't respond the same. They don't listen the same. And by then, the shift has already happened. At some point, this becomes a pattern. And patterns are what define you. Not what you say once, not what you do occasionally, but what you allow consistently. Because people don't test you randomly. They test you based on what has worked before. If they interrupted you once and nothing happened, they'll do it again. If they dismissed you once and you let it slide, they'll push it further, not aggressively, but gradually, because they're learning your limits. And if those limits keep moving, your position keeps dropping. That's the part most men miss. They think power is something you show in big moments. But power is actually built in repetition, in small, consistent signals that say, "This is where I stand." Without that, there is no structure, no stability, no reason for others to adjust. And when people don't need to adjust to you, you automatically adjust to them. That's where control flips. Now here's where it gets deeper. Most men are not aware of their own patterns. They think they're calm, but they're actually avoiding. They think they're patient, but they're actually hesitating. They think they're choosing not to react, but they're actually unsure. And that internal uncertainty leaks through micro-behaviors. A delayed response that feels unsure, a forced smile to smooth tension, a change in tone when pressure appears. These things seem small, but they are signals, and people are constantly reading signals. That's why even when you don't say anything, you're still communicating. And if what you communicate is uncertainty, people respond to that. They push more. They test more. They take more space, because there's nothing stopping them. Now compare that to a man who is internally clear. He doesn't question his position in the moment. He doesn't second-guess what he should allow. He doesn't hesitate when something crosses the line. And because of that, his behavior is clean. No overreaction, no delay, no confusion, just a simple correction. And that simplicity carries weight, because it shows something rare, not aggression, not dominance in the obvious sense, but certainty. And certainty changes everything. When people feel certainty in you, they stop testing randomly. They become more precise, more careful, more aware, because now there is structure, there is a line, and that line doesn't move. That's what most men never build. They keep shifting, depending on the situation, depending on the person, depending on the pressure. And every shift costs them a little more power, until eventually there's nothing solid left. Just reactions, just adjustments, just a version of themselves that fits the moment, but doesn't control it. By the time most men realize they've lost power, they try to fix it with actions. They speak more firmly. They try to assert themselves. They try to take control again. But it doesn't work the way they expect. Because power is not something you can suddenly turn on. It's something that was either maintained or slowly given away. And once it's gone, people don't instantly give it back. They watch, they test, they wait to see if this version of you is real or temporary. That's why forcing dominance doesn't work. It feels unnatural, inconsistent, and people pick up on that immediately because your past behavior is still there, still shaping how they see you, still defining your position. That's the reality most men don't want to accept. You don't lose power in one moment, and you don't regain it in one moment either. It's built the same way it was lost, through small, consistent behavior, through what you allow, through what you don't allow anymore. You stop over-explaining. You stop reacting instantly. You stop letting things slide that shouldn't. Not aggressively, not emotionally, but consistently. And at first, there will be resistance. People will test you more. They'll push a little harder, because they're used to the old version of you. The one that adjusted, the one that gave space, the one that was easy to move. But if you stay consistent, something shifts again. They start to recalibrate. They start to recognize the new boundaries. They start to adjust their behavior, not because you told them to, but because your actions now require it. That's how power is reestablished. Quietly, without announcements, without force, just through consistency. And here's the final truth. The moment you started losing power was the moment you stopped being solid. The moment you started adjusting too much, explaining too much, allowing too much. And the moment you regain it is when that stops. When your behavior becomes stable again. When your boundaries become clear again. When your presence no longer shifts based on others. Because in the end, power is not about controlling people. It's about being unshaken by them. And the man who reaches that point doesn't need to prove anything, doesn't need to force anything, doesn't need to chase anything, because his position is already clear. And once it's clear, people don't question it. They adjust to it.